All right, guys. So welcome to this evening's Mastermind. It's lovely to see everybody as always. So last few weeks we've been through programming. So we looked at kind of structuring sessions, structuring a week's worth of training, structuring training blocks, how to deal with bad sessions. We looked at deloads, all the good stuff, how to put programs together essentially. So we're now going to actually have a look at a lot of the content of the programs and go through some kind of exercise techniques. So tonight we're going to be looking through squats. Some of you may have done this before with me, some of you may not have, but we've got some new stuff in for you tonight, some new things for you to try. So it should be a useful one for you. Hands up if you've got squats in your program. Everybody, yeah, fantastic, good, as it should be. So if you don't have squats, you'll have some sort of variation of that, like sit to stands or box squats or something like this. And even if you don't have that, you're all sitting in a chair, so you're going to have to do a squat to stand up. So you will all do a squat at some point, so it's nice to get strong within these sorts of movements. So we're going to be running through squat technique tonight. Anybody, any questions at all before we get cracking? No, sure, no worries. So as always, guys, it's going to be like lots of info, and the reason for that, we want you to have all the info, but I don't want you to stress or feel overwhelmed about trying to learn absolutely everything that we go through. So usually there'll be one or two kind of main takeaways that you'll get from each session. So if you leave the session feeling like you know more than when you started it, that's a win in my book. So don't worry about trying to remember everything. We'll ask questions as we go through. Just to keep it interesting for you guys, but don't feel like you need to know the answers. Just throw out some guesses. All of that kind of engagement is going to really help you guys learn this sort of stuff. 2 seconds then, guys. I'll share my screen. Okay, everybody see that? Yep. Yeah. Fantastic. Cool. So squats. Let's chat through, first of all, what muscles we work whenever we're doing a squat. Anybody, any ideas? What muscles are you training whenever you squat?
Glutes.
Glutes, was that?
Yeah.
Yeah, glutes, absolutely. Yeah, training your glutes pretty hard whenever we squat, for sure.
Quads.
Quadriceps, definitely. Yeah.
Hamstrings to a certain extent.
Hamstrings, yeah. So hamstrings, you'll work them a bit. Yep, absolutely. Not too much in a squat, but definitely they do their part. So yeah, hamstrings you'll be working.
Calves.
Calves, yeah, calves. So they will be working. So it'd be very hard to squat if your calves weren't doing their job, and your calves and your soleus, so that muscle kind of goes underneath them. So for those of you that aren't sure, there's kind of muscles in the back of your lower leg. So definitely be really hard to squat if your calves weren't working. The same way if you kind of tibialis anterior, so that's the one on the front of your shin, wasn't working. So it'd be really hard to squat if they weren't doing their job, but also be really hard to kind of just stand up if they weren't doing their job. So they will be working, but probably not getting worked super hard. So other muscles will fatigue much longer before them, if that makes sense. So calves definitely, it's really important muscle group for stability, and especially when we're doing anything that requires more stability, like squatting with lots of weight. They're definitely really important to have it functioning well, but usually it's not the limiting factor with a squat. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, cool. Yeah, any other ideas?
Core.
Say again, sorry?
Sorry, the core.
Core, yeah, absolutely, yeah, cool. So your core is going to be working pretty hard whenever we're doing a squat, especially if we're doing like a back squat. So we've got a bar up on the top of our backs there. So depending on kind of variation of squat, your core will work slightly differently. Anybody, any idea what sort of muscle contraction is going on in your core whenever we're squatting? So our legs, so all the muscles we mentioned in our legs are kind of shortening and lengthening, or all the way around whenever we're squatting. What's going on with your core? Is there much core movement whenever we squat?
In my case, everything tightening to try and stop me falling over.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, cool. So it's trying to keep you stable. Yeah, it's trying to stop you falling. So you're trying to prevent movement with it as opposed to generate movement, right? Yeah, perfect. So your core is working isometrically. It's called, so isometric contraction. So you know, when you do a plank, you'll really feel your abs even though you're not moving. Okay, so just because we're not moving doesn't mean something isn't working pretty hard. So it's the same sort of thing with a squat. So your core can work super hard even if you're trying to stay pretty braced. Yeah, cool. So we've said quads, glutes, hamstrings, core, anything else. We'll chat about calves and ankles, that sort of thing. Anything else that you can think of? There's one major one with a squat that probably is often missed, I think, with regards to what's working hardest whenever we squat.
Muscles in your arms, because you're using your arms to squat.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I
balance
guess,
that,
yeah, so depending on the variation, you might use your arms a little bit. You can get like, you know, for example, if you're doing a body weight squat, then we're not going to use the arms too much. They could just be kind of dangling, or even if there were no arms there, we'd still be able to do that kind of variation of squat. So definitely in some, the arms will be working pretty hard, probably quite isometrically as well, similar to the core, just to hold everything nice and rigid. Anything in the legs, though, that we've missed?
I don't know what the muscle is, but is it like your inner thighs?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well done, Judith. Yeah, cool. So adductors, that one's called. So adductors adduct your thighs, but in this case, they work really hard to extend your hip, to straighten out your hip. Okay, so whenever you're standing up, especially out that bottom bit of a squat, your adductors, so the muscle on the inside of your thigh, works really hard to straighten out your hip. Okay, so that's the one that attaches onto that bony bit of your bum that you're all sitting on. That's called your ischial tuberosity. Okay, so your adductors or adductor magnus, so part of them attaches onto that bit, and it's quite a long muscle, comes down the inside of your thigh. So whenever you see someone squatting quite a heavy weight, you might see the knees move in ever so slightly, and this is, or it's quite noticeable on some people. So this is whenever your adductors are really contracting hard to generate that hip extension. They'll also pull inwards and adduct the thighs a little bit, or adduct the hips. So yeah, adductors work super hard, much more so than your hamstrings. So there's been a few kind of EMG studies done on that. So much more so than your hamstrings, your adductors will work really hard. Strong adductors, strong squatter usually. Okay. So adductors and quads, I would say probably the two that you'll feel it mostly in, but all these other muscle groups definitely come into it. So we've got a little list there if you want to take a wee screenshot. Give you a couple of seconds, guys, if you want to take a note or a screenshot or anything like that. All good?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question for the next few weeks at the start of each seminar. So make a note of the answer, and then you'll be ready to shout it at me next week. So two most important things in every lift. So we're looking at kind of your kind of heavy compound lifts. So things like your squats and your deadlifts. So what are the two most important things, would you say, with squatting, deadlifting, all these sorts of movements?
Solid feet position. What do I mean by that? Weight through your ankles into your feet.
Okay, yeah, definitely onto the right line. So one of them, absolutely. Okay, cool. So what would happen if the weight was like behind your feet?
You go backwards. Yeah, it's not
fall over, you'd lose balance. So yeah, balance, we said it. Yeah, perfect. So balance is one of them. Absolutely, yeah. So if we imagine trying to squat a really heavy weight whilst you're standing on a moving bus, we're going to struggle, right? Not because you lack strength, but because the bus is moving around. It makes it really difficult. So if we're not balanced whenever we're doing these movements, it makes it way harder than it has to be. So yeah, balance, super important. Anything else that we can think of?
Posture or technique?
Definitely, yeah. So I would say like technique kind of covers all of it. So you need to factor balance into your technique, and you'll need to factor this next thing into your technique as well. So you're saying positioning. So I would say definitely that kind of relates a little bit to balance, and maybe a little bit to this next bit as well. So yeah, we're onto the right lines for sure.
Right.
Definitely two important things. Sorry, go on.
The right weight?
Right weight, yeah, definitely. So I would say like appropriate loading is an important strategy for absolutely every sort of training that you do. So if we're looking more so at like kind of squats, deadlifts, these sorts of things here, so that is just applicable across the board. I 100% agree with you. But for these two lifts here, anything else you can think of. So if we've got a big heavy weight on our back, or holding the heavy weight in our hands, and we're standing up with that weight, so we're extending our knees and our hips, what do we think is important? So you were saying your core's working quite hard before. What's your core doing?
Stability.
Stability, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Keeps you stable, keeps you rigid, would you say?
Mhm.
Yeah, cool. So if I was to try to lift this hand up with my other hand, okay, and my other hand is really bendy, I'm going to have a tough job of lifting that hand up, right? If that stays rigid, I can lift it up. Okay, so same idea with your squats and deadlifts. So if you imagine you've got a weight on your back, or if you're holding the weight in your hands, right, the weight is effectively hanging off of your shoulders, your shoulder blades. Okay, so we're only able to extend our knees and our hips to generate that force. So we want all of that force to be able to actually get into the thing that we're trying to lift. Okay, so we need our core to be really solid, stable, really rigid in order to be able to actually move that thing. Okay, so force transfer is what I like to call it. So force transfer and prevention of unnecessary movement whenever we're lifting. Okay, so with balance there, we've got COM, so that's center of mass, and BOS there, that's base of support. I'll give you a wee second just to take a note. That makes sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the second one? BOS?
Base of support. So those are your kind of two components of balance. So we'll take a little bit of a closer look at that in a minute.
What was COM, sorry?
Center of mass.
Okay.
Cool. So if you got a note of that, we'll go through this again in the next couple of weeks, and we can see how these things can be applied to a lot of lifting, a lot of lifts basically. So it's very physicsy, and if you start to think a little bit more with a physics head on, it helps the lifts to make much more sense. Okay, so we've talked about like anatomy in the past for those of you that have done those with me, and we're looking at it more in terms of like levers and pulleys. So same idea here, right? So if you think about it more in terms of physics, because everybody's different, but physics never changes. Physics is always there, it's always the same, and it applies to everybody. It's just going to present differently, but it applies to everybody. Okay, so we can apply these for every single one of you across the board, really important things. Okay, so if we look at this picture here, so where would we say the center of mass is for this handle here?
At the end.
At the end?
Not sure.
Which end would you say?
The heavy end where the big end is. I'm not sure what you're meaning.
Yeah, no worries.
Is that what
That's
you
cool.
mean?
Yeah, so
Where
I think
the biggest weight is.
Yeah, definitely. So you're onto the right line. So we'll give you that. So I would say for this, because it's just a wooden handle, it's relatively even. So I think this is probably slightly bulkier at the center. Perhaps your center of mass would move from bang in the center a little bit more this way, but it's kind of roughly in the center. Yeah, so center of mass is basically on average where the most weight is. Okay, so it takes into account all of the different kind of weight distributions of the object. So where all of the mass is in the object, and it just averages it all out. And that point is your center of mass. So for this, it would be roughly here. Okay, and then when we look at the hammer here, so that's a hammer handle. This is with the head on it. Where's the center of mass now?
Near the head.
Yeah, nearer the head. Basically, is the head. I would say even. Yeah, absolutely. So the handle's quite light. The head's super heavy.
That's what I meant last time. Sorry, Tristan.
Say again. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I meant last time. I was looking at that one. Sorry, not that first one. Sorry.
Yeah,
That's me.
that makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah, agree with you 100%. And so the center of mass would be around that heavy bit, around where the head is there. So if you were to throw a hammer up, you would see that the handle kind of spins around the end of it. The end stays pretty much where it is. It'll obviously rotate, but the handle will kind of rotate around it, and that's because that's the center of mass. So if you to kind of throw an object, it'll revolve around the center of mass. Okay, not that any of you are throwing hammers around too often, but that's how that works. So it seems a little bit abstract, but we'll kind of relate it to lifting quite shortly. So that's what all center of mass is. So keep that physics head on. If we're looking at some wine glasses, right? So if we look at this one on the left, where would the center of mass be here?
The middle of it as you're looking down into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So where's, like, on average, where's the most weight going to be?
On the
In it?
base of the glass.
Glass.
The base of the glass, would say, yeah. So would you say that the base is heavier than this bit with the liquid in?
No, like the liquidy bit.
No, the
that's what
base of the
Bit,
glass.
sorry, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you then, 100%. So yeah, so the liquidy bit, that would be pretty much where the center of mass is. Yeah. Okay, so if we had like a really heavy base, then that would be where the center of mass is. But just because we've put some liquid in it, probably center of mass is round about here somewhere. Okay, so you'd say that's quite balanced. Nothing's going to happen to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Would you say this one is balanced?
No.
In the middle? No. Everyone agree?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say it is balanced, this one, but it wouldn't take much to unbalance it. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if it had like a flat bottom to it there, it would balance, right? But it really wouldn't take much. If someone sneezed, that would be it going over, right? So it's pretty much balanced, but it wouldn't take much. Okay, so where's the base of support here for this first one?
The bottom.
The bottom, absolutely, yeah. So base of support is just the bit that's in connection with the, if you imagine there's a table here, so base of support is just the bit that's in connection with the table. So when we look at this one, it's a much smaller base of support. Okay, so on average, the center of mass is like bang in the middle there, so it is right above the middle of the base of support, so it should balance. Okay, but it would not take much at all to bring, so even if that center of mass were to just move like this much across to one side, we know that's going over. Whereas if we moved it, if we move this one a tiny wee bit to the left there, it's just going to fall back to its balanced position again because it's got a larger base of support. Okay, so in order to make something fall over, we have to take that center of mass and move it way off to one side, or move it off to one side of the base of support, as we can see on the right hand side there. So center of mass roughly around here where all the liquid is, and we can see that's way over the side of where the base of support is. So unfortunately that glass of wine is a goner. Okay, so that's just your concepts of center of mass and your base of support, right? So if we look at a squatting diagram, so we've got 3 examples here. Okay, imagine that this person, or all 3 of these people, they're holding a heavy weight. So that's a barbell that you're looking at from sideways on, and it's a super heavy barbell that they're holding. Okay, so where's the base of support for these people?
The feet.
Yeah, absolutely. So the feet are the base of support. So our feet don't give us that much of a broad base of support, right? But they give us enough. Okay, and then where would the center of mass be?
Heaviest weight.
Where the weight is.
Yeah, the weight, the barbell, yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. So the barbell, assuming it's a really heavy barbell, that would be pretty much where the center of mass is going to be. Okay, so what do you, and so just to say about the barbell, okay, if it was much lighter barbell, it's going to influence the center of mass. It's probably not going to become the center of mass in the same way. But let's just, for the sake of keeping it relatively simple, if we just say it is a super heavy barbell, it basically becomes the center of mass, and it'll make this kind of a little bit easier to get heads wrapped around. So if we look at each of them, what do you notice about the relationship between the center of mass and the base of support?
Directly above it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cool. So this person's doing a really good job of balancing throughout their squat. Okay, and that's a really important thing. So if we think about each one of these kind of diagrams here, okay, do we think they're thinking about bending over more, or do you think they're just thinking about balancing and it ends up looking different?
If it was me, it'd be balancing.
Yeah, definitely. So this person just used a cue, just balance. Okay, so just try to keep the barbell directly above the middle of your feet. So just try and balance your squat. then it's going to present differently depending on where the barbell is. So on this one, we've got the barbell on the front. Okay, so they have to stay a little bit more upright and lean back a little bit in order to maintain that balance. Here we've got the barbell at the top of the back. Okay, so still quite upright, but a little bit more bent over in order to maintain that balance. And this one here, we've got the bar significantly lower. So they bend over much further in order to kind of maintain that balance. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so it sounds a little bit abstract whenever we're saying just keep your center of mass above your base of support. So whenever you're in the gym, thinking about that seems a bit daft almost. So just to break it down into a nice, easy to follow cue. Those of you that are able, that don't have injuries and do have space, stand yourself up and we'll do a squat. I'll chat you through it so you can just stand yourself up, find a wee space if you've got it. Okay, and if you pop your hands up in front of you like a zombie, so hands up like this, cool. And that just allows us to stay a bit more upright because it brings our center of mass forward a little bit whenever we do that. So what we're going to do, think about your feet and try and feel where the weight is distributed within your foot. So is it more on your heel? Is it more on your toe? Have a little sway back and forward, side to side, and try and feel it a little bit. Okay, anybody feel it more in their heels at the start?
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody feel it more on the toes? No. Okay, cool. That's quite a common one, that one, but no, not today. Cool, no worries. Cool. So what I want you to do, think about trying to keep the weight evenly distributed between your heel, the ball of your little toe, and the ball of your big toe on both sides. So even weight distribution, even pressure throughout that kind of 3-point of contact there. Okay, and all I'm going to get you to do is squat down really slowly, just in a stance that is comfortable for you, and just continue to think about that balance as you come down. Okay, so go slowly, and you can stop and correct yourself at any point and try and keep that balance nice and even. Go as deep as you possibly can whilst maintaining that balance, and then stand yourself back up again. Okay, and do that 2 or 3 times and just really try and maintain that balance. So even weight distribution between your heel and your toes. Focus only on that. Don't think about anything else. Cool, we'll do one more. Good stuff. Yes, cool. All right, take a wee seat. So that's all you got to think about in order to balance whenever you're doing a squat. Okay, so wherever the barbell is, it doesn't really matter. If you're focusing on how your feet feel, that's going to tell you whether you're in the right position or not. Okay, so if we just focus on kind of grabbing the floor with our feet and keeping that even weight distribution throughout your whole foot, this is going to really help you balance whenever you squat. Okay, so you might have heard cues that are like push your hips back, or push your knees forwards, or maybe push your knees back, or push your knees out, or all these sorts of different cues that you may or may not have been given whenever you're squatting. All of these cues are basically just to get you to do this. Okay, so pushing hips back, that's going to probably bring your center of mass back a little bit. So it's going to bring a bit more weight into your heels. Okay, so if you're a little bit more of a toe-y squatter, then sitting the hips back is going to be a great way to get the weight more in the middle. Okay, and then if you like to squat into your heels too much, then thinking about pushing these forwards a little bit more is going to be a really nice way of getting that weight forwards. Okay, but we don't have to even think about any of those cues. If we just say just balance and focus just on your balance, then sooner or later it'll kind of work itself out and you'll figure out where you need to be at different stages of the squat. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, this is interesting for me because I've always been under the impression I was supposed to keep the weight in my heels. I think I've been told that a number of times in the gym before. So I'm going to have to readjust how I squat. I'm always deliberately trying to put all the weight on the back of my feet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a really common cue. This is probably more common a few years ago. It was just how squats were taught. But yeah, absolutely not the case. We want to keep even weight distribution throughout the full foot. If you keep your weight too much in your heel, you'll end up feeling whenever you get to the bottom like you're falling over, or you won't be able to get too low. It's not great. You're basically reducing that base of support that you've got to a much smaller area, so it just makes the whole thing a little bit less balanced, a little bit harder to maintain good positions. So yeah, even weight distribution throughout the full squat is a really important thing. So push through your full foot. I think it's a common thing for people to come into the toes whenever they squat. So I think that the cue, get into your heels, was basically coming from people who were meaning get less in your toes. But what it should have resulted in is an even weight distribution throughout the full foot. So if anybody tells you squat only with your weight in your heels, just smile and nod and ignore it, and keep it in the full foot. All right, guys. So if we look at all three of these bonus points, which variation do we think is most likely to be the strongest? It can differ person to person, but which variation do we think is most likely to be the strongest? There is an overwhelming answer here.
I think the middle one.
The middle one.
Middle?
The first one.
You're thinking first one, number one? Okay.
I'd have said middle.
Yeah. Anybody for number three?
It's got the. It looks like it worked the glutes the most.
Yep. I would agree with that. It's going to work the glutes a little bit harder in number three. Would you say your glutes are quite a strong muscle?
For what you said earlier, we're going for quads and abductors.
Adductors, yeah. So it's going to work adductors pretty hard as well, this one, and glutes. Yeah, yeah. So number three tends to be the strongest variation for a few reasons. So yeah, you're dead right. It'll work glutes a little bit more. Basically, it loads up your glutes, loads up your adductors. It's going to load up your hamstrings a little bit more as well. So it's loading up lots of really, really strong muscle groups. So it allows you to use your hip extensors to a much greater extent. Okay, so we can use your quadriceps still, but it also allows you to really use your hip extensors, which are a bunch of very strong muscle groups. It also, can you notice how far the bar is away from the hip on number two and number three?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you see how it's a shorter distance on number two?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you imagine if you were holding your hand out like this, okay, if you're holding your hand out in front of you like a zombie like that, if I were to push down really hard on your, just in front of your shoulders, or if I was to push down really hard on your hands, which is going to be harder for you to keep that position?
And
Pushing on that hands, absolutely, because it's further away from the shoulder joint, right? So that's a bigger distance. So it's more leverage, so it's much harder. Okay, so I can push just as hard, but it's going to have much more effect if I push on the hands. So same thing here, right? So if that weight is further away, it's a longer lever, so that weight is going to have more leverage on you, and it's you're gonna find it harder to straighten up, essentially, because you're just pushing against a longer lever. Okay, some people will be stronger like this, some people are, but the vast majority of people will tend to be a little bit stronger, be able to lift a bit more weight with a low bar position, for those reasons. Okay, so it's just a kind of leverage thing, it's just a physics thing. That makes sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, great stuff. Cool. Generally speaking, people that are stronger with this variation, so that's your kind of high bar variation, tend to have really short femurs relative to their shins and their torso. So quite a long torso, quite a long shin, and a really short femur. So femur is your thigh bone, and they can squat like a piston, which is, as I said to the last group, really annoying because it's be really nice to be able to squat like that, but not many of us can, right? We tend to have or a lot of us have like a slightly longer femur. Okay, and that means that in order to balance, you're going to have to tip over a little bit more. And if you have to tip over a little bit more, then reducing that lever length is going to be a really beneficial thing to you. Okay, so if you're super upright, then the lever length doesn't really matter. It doesn't make too much of a difference because you've got your hips and you've got the bar here, and they're basically one right above each other. But as soon as we put that in front, okay, then that distance between the two starts to make a real difference. That makes sense? Yeah, good stuff, guys. Cool. So balance is the key takeaway from this one. Balance, super important whenever we squat. If you can't balance, you can't squat very much weight at all. Okay, so mobility restrictions is another thing that I'm sure many of you will have kind of struggled with, or perhaps do struggle with when it comes to squats. And there are a few things that might be lacking in mobility. We're going to go through the main culprits today. So first of all, we will chat about ankles slightly later on, but first of all, we're just going to chat about hips and knees. And you can actually do this one with me. So if you kind of sit yourself in your chair, lean back a little bit, and grab in that position there for me. So if you just kind of grab the bottom of the shin. Okay, and this is only if you don't have any sort of injury to your knee, to your hip, anything like that. If you are painful in any way, just don't do this at all and don't worry about it. Okay, and all I want you to do is just try to pull your heel towards your bum like that. Okay, you don't have to get it as close. I'm a little bit hypermobile, so my joints move further than they really should. So you don't have to get it as close there. Some of you might be able to, but try to pull it toward your bum. Okay, how many of you have managed to get it past 90 degrees? So 90 degrees at the knee would be kind of bearish with the shin.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So a lot of yeses there. Cool. By the way, if you do have mobility restrictions, we'll cover that as well with some kind of like range of motion regressions that you can do. But this is a nice way to test exactly how much range of motion you've got. So that's your knee. Okay, and then the next one to test is your hip. Okay, so we grab higher up this time. So give that a bash for me. Sit up nice and straight and grab up at the top of your shin, just below your knee. Okay, sit up nice and straight and try and pull your knee toward you like that. Okay, and see how close you can get. So are we getting the hips past 90 degrees?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, fantastic. Cool. So if we go back and we look here, we can kind of see if you're getting your hips and your knees past 90 degrees, then we're probably going to start to be able to get into some of these positions that we can see here. Okay, if you struggle with ankle mobility, then we'll chat about that. Okay, but a lot of the time, if we're actually struggling to hit squat depth, it's not so much a mobility restriction, it's more technique and balance. Ankle mobility definitely can be a factor, so we will chat about it, but a lot of the time it's balance that really affects people's ability to sit right down into the bottom of the squat. So what we can do with that is actually counterbalance, and this is a nice way to get confident going into a deep knee bend and a deep squat. Okay, so I'll show you the demo first, and then those of you that have got a door handy or something handy that you can do this on, then you can give it a little bash. Okay, so all we do is you just hold on to, so I'm holding on to the door handle there and leaning back against it a little bit, and that just counterbalances me. Okay, so I don't need the same amount of kind of forward knee movement, anything like that. And it just means that we can sit and sit and sit and sit and sit and just kind of balance in the bottom of the squat. Okay, so those of you that have got a door frame handy, go and give it a bash. You don't have to, so if you prefer to sit down for now, you can do. But if you do have relevant equipment handy, go and give this a shot. And if you don't want to do it right now, give it a shot at some point over the next couple of days. Okay, so hold on to some.
Are your knees going straight out, or are they going out at an angle?
So let your knees go wherever they want to go. So let them go where's comfortable for you. Okay, so there's no right answer to that. So we'll come on to that in a little bit, but just wherever feels most comfortable for you. Okay, so those of you that are giving this a shot, if you kind of lean back a little bit, okay, and rely on the thing that you're holding on to a bit, and just come down nice and slowly. And remember, you can use whatever you're holding on to help you stand back up again. Okay, so come down nice and slowly, hold on to that, and just try to get comfy in the bottom of the squat. And you'll probably find that you're getting way deeper than you're actually used to going. Okay, so give it a little bash. And you can try doing a couple of repetitions if you like, or if you want to take a seat, you can take a seat.
Just remind me what this does.
So it's just getting you confident going through a full range of motion. So when you hold on to a door frame like that, it counterbalances you. Okay, so it means that you're able to lean back a little bit. So that's going to allow you to get into a nice deep knee bend and get to the bottom of a squat. So those of you that tried that there, did you manage to get deeper than your squats normally would be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. There we go. So
I go deeper, but I tend to go up on my toes, so I need to.
yeah, so that's an ankle thing, that so we'll come on to how to fix that shortly. So it's actually quite an easy fix, that one, which is nice. So the hip and the knee, if we do have restrictions there, that can be a little trickier with regards to squatting, but the ankle one is a nice easy fix. So this variation, really, really nice, just to get you used to feeling what it's like at the bottom of a squat. Okay, and then what you can start doing is whenever you get to the bottom of the squat, try to just hover your hands away from whatever you're holding, or just sit forwards a little bit and try and put a little bit less weight through whatever you're kind of holding onto. and just gradually get a bit more confident, learning what it feels like to be down at the bottom of that squat there.
My feet won't go flat on the floor without me leaning back a little bit. Is that?
Yeah, so
an
that's
issue with
why
ankles?
so that comes down to ankles again. So we'll come on to that, so don't worry. But that's why this variation is quite a nice one. So it's going to allow you to get a really good full deep knee bend, without ankle dorsiflexion being too much of a limiting factor. So you can see there, like I've got quite a long femur, so I do kind of flex a lot of my ankles. Again, I'm hypermobile, so my ankles flex a lot more than average. But if you lean back a little bit, you'll probably find that you're going to be able to squat without requiring too much forward knee movement. So you'll still be able to get a nice deep knee bend doing this variation. And if you really can't, then you can try the tips and tricks that I'll give you shortly for your ankles.
Cool.
So if I'm doing a squat normally, I'd really, to get that far down, I'd really have to lean forward.
Yeah, me too.
Which I'm under the impression you're not supposed to do that.
So you should lean forward as much as necessary in order to balance, just as the person on the right hand side here is doing. Okay, so leaning forward is not physiologically dangerous. It can sometimes be inefficient with a squat to have too much forward lean. A lot of the time, whenever you have to lean forward a lot, it's because we're not counterbalanced. So another really nice way to counterbalance yourself is holding a nice big heavy weight. But whenever you do that, so that would be your next variation like that. Okay, that's also counterbalancing me. In order to do that, you probably want to be quite confident getting down to that depth of squat anyway. So it's nice to start by doing a comfortable variation. Perhaps you want to do that in your warm-ups as well, and just remind your hips and your knees what it should feel like whenever you're down there. And then we can grab a weight and try to move similarly to what you just did, and just kind of gradually introduce your body to what it feels like to kind of be at that depth. Okay, so if we have range of motion, and you felt there whether or not you do, okay, so we did those little tests by bending your knees and your hips, you felt if you've got that range of motion or not. So whatever range of motion you've got, it's probably a really good idea to get strong within that range and not cut any of it out. Okay, so whatever range of motion you've got, it's a nice idea to get strong within that range of motion and train all the way through it. It's great as well for hypertrophy. It's great for training to get bigger muscles, right? If we go through full ranges of motion, your muscles respond very well to that. They like a big deep stretch. That's a good thing for them. So there's a multitude of benefits to going through a big range of motion. If you are restricted though, don't worry, just go through the range that you have and figure out the range that you have by doing those tests that we've shown you there.
And also it's much easier to get further down when you're doing a goblet squat than it is if you're doing a squat with a bar.
Yeah,
that's normal then.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you won't have to think about it as much, and it's just because of that counterbalancing.
Okay.
Yeah. So whenever you've got a bar, you're going to have to get a certain element of forward lean in order to balance it. So that can make it slightly more challenging. You can lift much more in a back squat than you can a goblet squat, but goblet squat you won't have to think about your balance too much. You can just kind of go up and down. So it's a nice variation. It's a great variation just to kind of get started there. Okay, how wide or narrow do we think we should stand?
Your feet hip width apart.
Okay, yeah.
And
Everyone
can I
agree,
just
or
ask-
any other ideas?
Can I just ask something as well, please? Sorry, you mentioned goblet squat. Is that squatting with the weights in front of you?
Yeah, so that's a goblet squat that I'm demonstrating there. So if you see my hands on the weight, you see how they make like a goblet shape.
I can't see if there's any weight or anything there. Sorry, that's why I was asking. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So
So see,
have you got a weight
there
in
I'm
your
holding
Yeah.
a dumbbell there.
Right, okay.
Yeah, but you probably see how my hands make like a bit of a goblet shape between them. That's why it's called a goblet squat.
Right, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I'm not on a mobile next time because I can hardly see anything. Sorry.
No worries at all.
If your feet are wider, you'll change. I was just thinking again, you change the muscles that the muscles that are being used. So wider, I'm guessing, it is a guess, just I'm trying to think what I would be doing. Wider feet, the glutes would be used more. The abductors would adductors would be used more.
Yeah, I think I would agree probably with both of those things. Definitely adductors, and probably glutes as well. Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to bias certain muscle groups. They'll all still be working, but it's going to bias certain muscle groups where we stand for sure. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So if you stand wider, it's going to bias certain muscle groups. So where should we stand probably to start off with a squat? Where do you think you should stand? So we've got one vote for kind of hip width. Does anybody agree? Anybody think anything different?
Shoulder width.
Shoulder width. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Just because it's easier if I do it shoulder width, I'm going for shoulder width too.
Yeah, okay. Cool. So I think you're all right. So you should squat wherever feels good. So if really wide feels good to you, do that to start off with. If narrow feels really good, do that to start off with. Okay, so everybody is going to be built differently. You can even have people with different hip structures on each side, right? So every single person is going to be different. How your hip is structured, the different lengths of your limbs in relation to other portions of you. So like you're kind of, we were talking about torso, shin and femur before. So the kind of three main levers that are involved there. So all these kind of different things, that's going to have a bit of an impact on it as well. And as we said, like hip structure, so where your hip likes to move, you know, some people will probably find that whenever you pull your knee up, so if we do that kind of hip flexion test that we just did before, if you bring your knee straight up towards you, it's harder than if you bring your knee out and up to you. Okay, so if you bring your knee out a little bit and then up, you might find you get a little bit higher. So loads of it, and some people might find the opposite. So it should just be, to start off with for a squat, stand where feels good. And I think that you're right, it probably will be somewhere around hip or shoulder width. Okay, so it probably will be around there, but some people prefer narrower than that, and some people prefer wider. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. And then, as Patricia was saying, you can, with certain variations, kind of mess about with it a little bit if you want to bias which muscle groups are being used more than others. But generally speaking, I would do that more for your kind of accessory work, and for your main strength work, you want to squat in a way that allows you to lift the most weight, right? So if we want to get strong, we want to lift lots of weight. So we want to squat in a good, efficient way that allows us to lift most weight, essentially.
Okay. Just ask about the feet. Are they supposed to be forward or pointed out?
Same answer to that. So some people stand with a wide stance and point their feet forwards. Some people stand with a narrow stance and point their feet out, and every variation in between. They, I would say, definitely shouldn't be pointed in. I can't imagine that would feel particularly comfortable for anybody. You might find an anomaly who finds that is better for them. I've yet to find it. So anything from kind of forwards to like 10 and 2, generally speaking, anywhere within that range, have a mess about with it, see what's most comfortable for you. Yeah, for me, it's kind of there. And ideally, we probably want your knees roughly lining up with your feet whenever you're squatting. But again, a little bit of variation is fine. So mine pretty much line up at the same line as my feet there. I've got a couple lifters, really good, really strong lifters, and they have their feet pointing pretty much straight forwards, but their knees go out quite a bit, and that feels good for them. It feels strong for them. Their hips feel a bit happy whenever they squat, so that's how they squat. Okay, so it is very, very individual. So I'd encourage you to have a mess about the squats and just figure out what feels good for you, because what feels good is likely to probably be good for you, especially when it comes to getting strong. Cool.
So it doesn't injure your hips. Sorry, it doesn't injure your knees when your knees don't track the position of your feet.
No. What is likely to lead to an injury is doing something that you're not used to doing. So if your knees always come in a little bit whenever you squat, I remember we were saying that about kind of adductors. So whenever adductors do their job on a heavy squat, you'll notice that people have a bit of knee valgus. That's when the knees come in. This is not putting you at significantly more injury risk. If you're used to moving like that, it's absolutely fine. It's just doing anything. Okay, so if you're not used to moving with everything, you know, perfectly in inverted commas lined up, if you're just not used to moving like that, that's not how you've moved before, then that's probably going to be a bad thing for you to be doing. It's just most people will just tend to move like that naturally. So most people will find that that feels easiest. But yeah, we want to try to come away from thinking that a certain position or a certain technique is going to injure us, because I think this can generate a lot of fear of movement with training. So by far the most important things are your appropriate loading. So starting out light and gradually progressing, so not doing any sort of load that you're not used to. And then if you do a movement that you're not used to, a certain type of movement that you've not done before, then all the more reason to really start light and give your body a chance to condition to it. Our bodies are adaptive. I think if we look at the Paralympics, right, we can see people there, like high jumpers who have their one foot that's incredibly pronated. There's probably a good deal of like spasticity going on, so we tend to get that pronation, that a lot of kind of adduction, internal rotation of the hip. All of these things can happen with spasticity. It tends to be the kind of anti-gravity muscles that would contract up. So we've got that really inward facing knee, and these guys are doing high jumps far higher than I will ever hope to jump. And I used to be a gymnast, right? So they're incredible athletes. So your bodies will adapt to all sorts of different things. You just have to do it gradually enough that allows your body the chance to actually adapt to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good, great stuff, guys. Cool. Okay, so we've got Gabriel here. So he's one of my lifters. He's demonstrating a high bar squat. So that's like the person in the middle from that diagram there. Okay, so one thing you'll notice he's doing now is he breathes in and holds his breath before he goes down. So imagine he's kind of squatting underwater there. What that does is it helps to keep his core really nice and solid. So if you imagine a sealed can of Coke, okay, that will be really stiff and solid. So you could probably stand on it and it'll be fine. As soon as we open it and you stand on it, it'll crush. Okay, so this is what he's doing to kind of maintain a lot of intra-abdominal pressure. Okay, and that helps to keep him nice and rigid. So he breathes in, holds his breath, he goes down and up, and breathes out at the top. Okay, he's also thinking whenever he holds his breath, he's imagining he's pushing his stomach outwards. So imagine he has a belt around his midsection and he pushes his stomach out as if he's trying to pop that belt open. And that keeps everything really nice and rigid. So that helps with force transfer, which is what we were chatting about before. Okay, so we don't have to worry about this too much whenever we're on the lighter side. So whenever you're doing things like goblet squats, you won't really be able to pick up enough weight with your arms for a big breathe and brace and a really kind of solid, large amount of intra-abdominal pressure to be that necessary. But as you start to get stronger, and especially if you want to start doing kind of heavy back squats and all these sorts of things, learning how to breathe and brace effectively is going to be a really useful and important thing for you. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So you can look where he's standing there. So he has kind of roughly a kind of shoulder width stance there. So I'm doing a low bar squat here. Low bar tends to be wider anyway, and I've got quite a long femur, quite a long thigh bone. So in order for me to kind of get my knees out the way, I take a really wide stance and I get my knees out the way quite a bit by doing that. I'm not built very well for squats. So I kind of take a big wide stance there, and that's a slightly lower bar position on my back. So you can see there's a bit more forward lean there towards the bottom. Okay, but we can see that bar's tracking pretty much directly over the middle of my foot. So the weight there probably isn't quite enough for it to be fully like center of mass. So we can see a slight kind of track forwards there of the bar. So if you watch the tip of the barbell on the way down, we can see that slight forward movement just there. Okay, but it's not too much. And as soon as the weight probably went up, so as soon as we put another plate on there, it probably evened itself out. I hope it did anyway. Okay. So all the same cues. The cues are the same. So we breathe and we brace. We maintain even weight distribution throughout our feet. We go as deep into range of motion as we can whilst maintaining kind of neutral-ish positions, and then stand up. Okay, so all these cues are basically the same, but it just presents differently depending on where we've got that bar. So Gabs here is demonstrating a front squat. So you can see he's got a slightly narrower stance. A lot of the time people will favor that for a front squat. Nothing wrong with going wide on a front squat, but usually because it's less demanding on hip mobility and more so on knee, a slightly narrower stance feels quite good. So mess about with it and see what feels good for yourself. What do you notice about his elbows whenever he's front squatting?
Look quite high up.
Yes, absolutely, quite high up. What would happen if his elbows dropped down?
The weight shift.
Yeah, the weight would just drop off, right? So whenever you're front squatting, you're going to be able to front squat way more weight than you can physically actually hold there with your arms. So that's why we want to lift our arms up like this, so the weight just sits there. Okay, so we get it right the way to the back. Okay, so if you lift your hand up in front of you, you can all give that a bash. Lift your hand up in front of you for me, sorry. Yeah, perfect. Have a feel of your shoulder muscle. Okay, and then move your hand towards you, so move it behind your shoulder muscle, and you'll notice like a little divot. Yep. So that is handily designed for front squats, that divot. So if you're ever doing front squats, wedge it right back like this and get those elbows up. And I also like to think whenever I stand up out of a front squat about going home, because I don't like front squats. But apart from that, I think about leading the movement with my elbows. Okay, so drive those elbows up first. Okay, so if you lead the movement with your chest and your elbows, it keeps you in a nice solid position. Okay, if he let his hips shoot out behind him, he'd end up tipped over quite a bit. And it's super challenging if you get tipped over forwards in a front squat. It's super challenging to actually finish the lift. Okay, so we want to stay super upright in the front squat. It just helps us to balance it. Well, that making sense?
Yeah.
Come on.
I've just got a quick question. Why would you do front squats instead of the other ones? What's the difference?
Yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily do it instead of, you might do it as well as. It really depends. So, for example, if you struggle with shoulder mobility, it can be really difficult to actually get into a good back squat position and to get your kind of hands back there if you've got kind of tough shoulder mobility. So it can be a nice alternative from that point of view. If you do Olympic lifting, so Olympic lifting is your kind of clean and jerk and your snatch, then you will effectively be catching things like your clean and jerk in a front squat. So practicing the front squat and getting strong in that position is a really good thing to do. If you wanted to bias your quads a little bit, then front squats can be great for that because there's not a whole lot of hip extensor going on here. Okay, so if we look at whenever he's at the bottom, I'll pause it when he's down there. Okay, so the weight's just kind of sitting down here, basically straight above the hips, but the knees way out in front of where the bar is. Okay, so that means that there's going to be, from a leverage point of view, far more leverage being put on knee extension than there is on hip extension. And the hips just aren't quite as flexed at the bottom there as they would be in a low bar squat. So it's really good from a quad point of view. It's great from a core point of view. So if you want to improve your ability to keep a really rigid back, especially upper back, so your upper back tends to be the bit that wants to do this whenever we front squat, so it kind of forces you to keep that position really nice and solid. Front squats can be great from that point of view. So there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do them. Why you might not want to do them, they're nowhere near as strong. So if we want to get strong, we probably want to do the variation where you can lift more weight. Front squats won't tend to help with general strength quite as much. If you're built like me, I've got quite a long femur and quite a short torso. So in order to balance, whenever I front squat, I need to have a little bit of forward lean. And as we kind of discussed, if you're leaning forwards a little bit in a front squat, it makes it incredibly difficult to actually stand back up again, just because that bar wants to fall off the whole time. So then the limiting factor for me is not my legs. I could lift way more with my legs. The limiting factor is just I'm at a disadvantageous position when it comes to like leverages and won't be able to pick the bar up. So for me, front squat's terrible for leg strength. Good if I need to force myself to use lighter weights. So maybe use them on a deload every now and again. All sorts of different reasons. If you can justify it and then you track whether it works or not for the thing that you wanted it to work for, then it's a good thing to have in your program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. And it doesn't hurt your back so much, does it?
Yeah, so it'll you'll probably feel it much more in your upper back, but lower back, absolutely. So just from a leverage point of view, it's just pretty much stacked straight above. There's not as much forward lean and not as much weight. It forces you to lift lighter weights. So it's not going to be as much strain through your lower back, which may or may not be a good thing. We want strong lower back, so loading them up is a nice thing. But if we have sore lower backs, we need to be careful with them and load up nice and gently. Front squats might be a nice kind of reintroduction to squatting before we move on to back squat variations.
I was just thinking of this week I put the bar on my back, straight on my back, and it was a little bit sore for a couple of days, the actual where the bar connected with my
Yeah.
back. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, front squats, I mean, they don't hurt your back, but they do hurt your front. So
Oh, do
like
they? Oh, I
either
thought
way.
it might be a bit spongier at the front.
No, less spongy in my experience.
Okay.
Yeah, but you will get used to that.
Oh, will I?
It,
Okay.
yeah.
I need to woman up then.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it does take a little bit of getting used to it, and it's never comfortable, but you get used to it being uncomfortable. That's maybe a better way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right
Yeah.
then. Thanks.
And you'll get super strong. So that's the main thing. Okay.
So what would you suggest is a reasonable starting weight if you haven't done weighted squats for a while?
As in for like a back squat, are you meaning, or for a back squat? Well, if you want to start in a squat rack, the barbell is 20 kilos. So I would suggest starting doing like warm up, do some body weight squats, maybe some goblet squats to kind of warm up, and then just move on to the barbell. Make sure you've got safety bars in or someone there to spot you, and just use the barbell and see how it feels. If you can do kind of 8 reps and you still feel like you've got another 6, 7 in the tank or something, you could bump it up a little bit, or you could just leave it there for the day and bump it up the next time you go in. But they basically start at 20 kilos whenever you're in the rack, and you can build up from there. Yeah. You can use lighter weights for a back squat, but the trouble is actually getting the weight up onto your shoulders in the first place. And if it is a weight that you can lift and put up on your shoulders, then you may as well probably just goblet squat until you feel like you're kind of ready to move on and do back squats. I sometimes get people like first time in their gym doing back squats on a barbell, so it depends on the individual. You might find that there's some restrictions and in terms of mobility and strength and all these sorts of things, so that we might have to do different variations. It just takes a little bit of trial and error and warming up properly and just going from super light and building up gradually to figure out what's good for you. Okay, so ankle mobility. A couple of you have mentioned this one. This is super common. I see this with I don't want to put a percentage on it necessarily, but definitely over half of people that I'll get squatting probably see a little bit of a lack of ankle mobility. So if we just go back quickly to that one, okay, we can see we don't need as much ankle mobility in a back squat, especially in a low bar back squat, as you would in a front squat. So the variations that you're doing will kind of dictate a little bit how much mobility you need. But we're looking at dorsiflexion, so that is this angle here. Okay, so if you guys bend your foot and lift your toe up towards your head, that movement that you've just done there is dorsiflexion. Okay, so let me get back there. Sorry. So if you've got good dorsiflexion, so like I'm hypermobile, so my ligaments aren't really doing their job that well. So I have a lot more dorsiflexion than average. So I've got good dorsiflexion. So even though I've got quite a long femur, I can get my knee way past my toe and still keep my feet pretty flat on the floor. Not a lot of people will have dorsiflexion like that, but also not a lot of people will have a femur that's quite that long in comparison to their torso. You probably won't need that much dorsiflexion. You can try a couple things if you struggle. So if you struggle with dorsiflexion, if you struggle with ankle mobility, so that's what decent dorsiflexion looks like. So able to squat through full depth, feet flat on the floor. So if you struggle, you'll get stuck about here. And what's going to happen then, if you want your knees to go forwards, is you're going to end up going into your toes like that. Okay. Anybody had that before?
Yeah.
Yeah, a few hands. Yeah, cool. Okay. And then the other thing that might happen is you get stuck there and you just feel like you're falling over backwards.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what happens if you can't get that dorsiflexion, you can't get the knees forwards without the feet coming up. Okay, so if you keep your feet flat and you go down, you fall over backwards. Or if you want to just keep going down and stay balanced, you have to come into your toes. Is it dangerous to come into your toes from a physiological point of view?
I just said so, yeah.
Balance, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I would agree with that, definitely, yes. So if we look at it just from a physiological point of view, it's not specifically dangerous to be in the toes and go through full ranges of motion. It's not specifically dangerous, but as Veronica was saying there, balance is definitely going to be significantly harder. So if you go into your toes, you're kind of really reducing that base of support, so it's going to be much harder to kind of balance a weight. And then if we're trying to lift really heavy weights, our job is made much harder if we can't actually balance properly, or if we've got poor balance, as we've kind of discussed before. I understand, by the way, guys, that we're on 8 o'clock. So if anybody does need to shoot, don't worry, it's all recorded. But we'll crack on for the next kind of 5 minutes or so, and then we'll be done. Doing really well, guys. So yeah, it's not specifically dangerous to be coming into the toes, but it's not that stable, and it's probably going to limit how much weight you can lift. So we probably do want our feet to be relatively flat. Okay, so if this is you, really nice, easy fix. I'm literally using the lid from a laundry basket here. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy, plank of wood. And what we can see there is that's just underneath the heels, and the toes stay on the floor. Okay, so we've got pretty much 90 degrees here at the ankle. I'm maybe a little bit past, but if you would struggle to go past 90 degrees, you could just use something slightly thicker on the floor. So maybe something thicker than what I'm using there. And put your heels on that, and that's going to allow you to have contact with the floor directly kind of through whatever it is you've wedged in there, have your ankles at 90 degrees and still get a good amount of forward knee movement. Okay, so if I didn't get that forward knee movement, I'd end up really tipped over, either falling over backwards or really kind of rounded back in order to balance at the bottom in like a very inefficient position for lifting weight. Okay, so a bit of artificial dorsiflexion allows us to stay nice and upright. Okay, so if you think that second video is you at any point, give this a bash and see what it feels like to you. Okay, and you can also give all of those other things a bash that we've been through tonight, the different kind of variations, and this will help you with your squats and figuring out what's good for you. So just another picture of the same thing here, basically. So if we look at her here on the left, 90 degrees. Okay, if we look at her over on the right, it's still 90 degrees, but she's gotten much deeper just because she's got those underneath the heels. Okay, you also notice she's gone a little bit wider with the knees. Again, it just depends on the individual, but if you've got the hips for it and it feels good, you can stand a little bit wider, you can point your toes out a little bit, you can let your knees track outwards a little bit. And this means that your knees don't really have to go forwards as much because they can go outwards, so it kind of displaces that a little bit. That's why I like to take a wide stance on squats, as I was saying before. It just feels better for me because I've got that long femur. So this allows you to get a little bit of depth as well. So have a mess about with that, guys. So if you struggle with squat depth, have a mess about with the angle of your toes, have a mess about with how much you push your knees out on the way down, have a mess about with your stance. Definitely wedge something in underneath your heels and give that a shot and see how that feels. And also test your range of motion, as we went through before, and see how much you actually have. Okay, so sitting in the chair, test it, see how much you have. And if you've got a good amount of range of motion at your hip and knee, it's just a matter of time and practice and a bit of trial and error and figuring out what works for you in terms of squatting, and you will be able to do a good deep squat. Okay. Last thing, if you do really struggle with range of motion, so if you can't kind of passively get that knee, you know, past that 90 degrees or whatever degrees you have available there, right? If you really are kind of restricted, and there can be a number of reasons why you are, we go through just a reduced range of motion squat. So we just want to get strong within the range of motion that we have. We don't really want to leave any of that range of motion out. Okay, so what you can do to standardize that is just sit onto a box or a chair or something like that. Okay, and you can, if it is a range of motion restriction that you think you're going to be able to progress, so perhaps it's just kind of muscle shortening, or sometimes people have had arthritic changes, but there's actually kind of scope for slight progression there in terms of range of motion, not all the time, but sometimes there is, then you can gradually lower whatever you're sitting down to. The reason that I quite like to do it onto a box or a chair or something is it standardizes it and it makes it the same every single time you do it. Because temptation is, okay, so let's say we start out body weight and we do just a partial squat with nothing underneath us. That's absolutely fine. Then we add a little bit of weight and we probably do slightly less of a squat on the way down, and we add a little bit more weight, we do less of a squat again, and then we add a little bit more weight, we do less of a squat again. We end up squatting like this much at the end of it. Okay, so it's nice to try to standardize it so we know how much range of motion we've got, and we can feel that physical contact of the box with your bum every single rep, and you feel for that, and you can gradually get stronger within that range. So that's why I'd recommend doing a box squat. But if you're going to video yourself and keep yourself really honest, then you can just do partial squats. If that works better for you and it feels nicer, do that. But just try to make sure you're strengthening yourself at least in 1 or 2 movements through the full amount of range of motion that you actually have. Cool. Any questions? Anybody want to see any of those slides again?
What can you do to improve the ankle mobility?
Sure. So yeah, really good question. So I would definitely just start using that whenever you're squatting, just to kind of compensate for it. But if it is something that you want to improve at, if it is down to muscle shortening, sometimes it's just a structural thing, as people almost get bone on bone contact and just can't push past 90 degrees, in which case that's you're not going to improve that. So have a little bit of a feel of it and see if it kind of feels springy when you get to the end of that range, or see if it feels like you're getting a pinch and a bone on bone contact at the front of your ankles. Have a little bit of a feel of it. But if it is springy, then you can do a few things for it. So I would suggest two main movements. It would be a slow eccentric calf raise. So eccentric just means the way down. So if you stand on like a step and lean on something, so you've got your balance, and stand with just, so if this is the step and this is your foot, stand with just your toes on the step and push your heels down like this, and then stand all the way up. And push your heels down like this and stand all the way up, and really focus on that eccentrics of the way down and trying to get a good loaded stretch on the way down each repetition. So that's the kind of movement that we're trying to progress, is that. And I would also combine that with some toe raises. So if you kind of lean back with your back against a wall and your weight in your heels, and you can do a little bit of a kind of squat and just lean back against the wall, and then all you're trying to do is just lift your toes up off the floor and put them back down again. Lift your toes up off the floor and put them back down again, and that's strengthening the muscle at the front of your shin. So if you do two of these, there's other things that you can add to that for sure, but if you do both of these, that'll be a really good start at just kind of strengthening the muscles around your ankles through a full range of motion. And what we're doing is not only strengthening them, we're strengthening them through range of motion, so we end up actually keeping the range of motion that we go into. That makes sense?
Yep, thank you.
Cool, no worries. Any other questions, guys? No, good stuff. Cool. Well, really well done tonight, guys. I hope that was useful for you. If you have any questions or anything like that that you would like to add, then just pop it through onto my Telegram, and I'll look forward to seeing videos from them from you if you've got them, but no worries if not. And we'll catch up next week. We'll have a look at some deadlifts next week, guys. Okay. Have a lovely rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah.